And you got the Virgin story as well.
Yes.
Oh, you're
Hi,
live.
hi everyone. So welcome to the latest industry news edition of the Aerospace Chronicles. I am Katrina Douglas, founder of the Launch Strategist. This is
Bunmi, Durowoju.
So, welcome to this week's edition, and we're doing things a little bit different. There's so much going on in the aerospace sector in terms of news and all kinds of wonderful things happening, some good, some not so good. But the point of this live is really just to give you an overview, our thoughts around what's happening in aerospace. And if you're not familiar with everything that's happening in the news, just to give you a snippet and a quick rundown of the news stories that have really resonated with us.
Yep, definitely.
Fabulous. So, most of you will be aware that the biggest news, I think, over the last couple of weeks has been that Blue Origin flight. So Blue Origin is owned by Jeff Bezos, and they had an all-women celebrity flight. And so the flight was launched with an all-female crew, Katy Perry, Gail King, and Lauren Sanchez. Wonderful, that's great. Views have been mixed on that. From a awareness of the space industry perspective, it was good. We're always banging on about the fact that the UK space industry, the global space industry doesn't get the level of profiling it deserves, how phenomenal it is. So it was good to see it in the press. However, because there was so much fanfare around the all-women crew and the celebrities, intentionally, you could have missed some of the meat behind the mission. And so we wanted to highlight some key points. And I love this post by one of the passengers, actually, Aisha Bow. And she's an aerospace engineer, former NASA rocket scientist, and the first Bahamian to fly to space. And so the first is really just to profile the fact that there were actually women in space that have decades of experience, are actually engineers that were actually on the spacecraft. And, Aisha put out a really great post about a week ago about to give a bit more context for the flight and what it was really about. So first, in terms of the purpose of the mission, which could have been lost, is the fact that the mission made history, she says, in more ways than one. She says she served as a science payload operator for the first ever HBCU led research project to fly aboard New Shepard, developed in partnership with Winston-Salem State University. The mission also marked a first for BioServe Space Technologies, whose fluid processing apparatus hardware was flown to qualify it to future use on orbit. So this wasn't just about, women going to space. There is actually a wider mission here that was about the future of space. And she goes on to say, in addition to advancing plant biology research by examining how crops like chickpeas and sweet potatoes grow in microgravity, to support future food security. So this was not just about, like I said, a few women going off to space. It was about, the future of future space projects and environmental issues like food scarcity and food security moving forward. Food security, in fact. And she says she wore a bio button as part of a NASA-funded study as well. So all these things in terms of the environment and things like that, we could have missed because it was, very much about the celebrity. And so it was about the climate impact as well. So this is really important. Rockets to date have only been able to be used once. And this was about creating a reusable rocket. So she says rockets do have an environmental cost, just like cargo ships, long haul flights, and even your average data center. But this wasn't just about one flight. The long game is reusability. And that's important. And that's a really great development in the space industry. So again, she says the role of private people as well was important. And so she goes on to say she's bought STEM access to over 10,000 students worldwide, including in the Bahamas. The goal isn't just to go to space, it's to bring what we learn back home. So this was a learning excursion, and we just didn't want to lose sight of that in the fanfare that it was. And also, it's about representation. It's not just about optics, it's about access. And that's what she says. And I love that. And she says, as a Black woman and first generation Bahamian American, she didn't grow up thinking space was for her. Many of us didn't. And this message sent a powerful message that science isn't reserved for the elite few. It belongs to all of us. And if one young girl saw her and thought, maybe I could study engineering, she considers the mission a success. And I think that's a really great point to land on, that it was about so many things. It was about societal advancement. It was about representation. It was about climate. There was a wider mission to this. So if you haven't seen those articles, it's worth having a read. You probably have. If you're in the aerospace and space sector, you probably have seen them. But definitely Aisha Bow on LinkedIn is worth following, and you can see this post of hers and you can read it in more detail. Because she's an inspiration.
I love that. And it's really interesting how everybody is trying to eke the most they can out of getting up into space. Although I know it was considered a suborbital flight and quite short, but what you can get out
in just that short time.
And of course I flipped what we were going to talk about straight away. Changed it already, as I'm known to do, because I want to jump on that piece about the food scarcity, the research that she was doing up there around the environment and the climate as well. And I think I'm sure it is, again, not lost on those in the industry, but those who are not necessarily in the industry, the doorway to getting into space and your reasons why don't necessarily just have to be because I'm going to sit on a space rock and get there. And that is that resonates with the story one of the stories that I picked up, which was ESA, so the European Space Agency's launch of the biomass satellite, and their intention is to map global forests. So in just April 29th, they launched a satellite on board a rocket. So the rocket was Vega C rocket. I also love the fact that they launched it from French Guiana.
Nice.
So we're talking about Bahamas, we're talking about French Guiana. This is a whole global movement. And it was equipped with like a massive satellite with like a 40-foot antennae. And this is supposed to be it will be orbiting the Earth about 15 to 16 times daily. And it's going to be there for about 5 years. And it's going to be, what it's able to see is actually able to penetrate the forest canopy and pick up and measure the woody biomass underneath. Now that's going to provide really great data with respect to the carbon storage in the earth. And as you know, once you start talking about carbon storage, you start having all of these data points that will enable you to look at climate change, the impact of climate change, and also our ability to conserve forests as well. So sort of that. And then imagine what Aisha was looking at in terms of food scarcity and such, like the climate work that they're doing there. It's really interesting how, again, going up to look down and to see where the impact is.
And I think that's really interesting because, again, sometimes we struggle to make the connection between how space impacts everyday life. And when governments and even private companies are investing all of this money into space, you can be left thinking, well, there's enough problems here on Earth. Why on earth are we going into space? But something like this, like satellites to actually look at things like that, demonstrate how space can make life on Earth better and improve our insights and our decision-making ability on things like security and environment and climate and things like that. So that's super important. Thanks, Bunmi. So the next story that jumped out was GE Aerospace CEO calls for tariff-free trade in the aviation sector. On our last LinkedIn Live, we spoke about the impact. Yeah, the T word, the impact of tariffs. And tariffs are estimated to cost GE Aerospace more than 500 million this year. And so the CEO of GE has been in talks with Trump's cabinet about reestablishing a tariff-free regime for the aerospace industry under the 1979 Agreement on Trade in Civil Aircraft. And he's done that in a meeting with President Donald Trump. And so, the tariff scenario is very, very interesting. It says here that the Trump's trade war has created the biggest uncertainty for the aerospace industry since COVID-19 pandemic. And it has also led to a breakdown in the industry's decade-old duty-free status, putting aircraft deliveries in limbo. Because some of GE's aerospace customers are struggling to accurately forecast their business. They don't know what's going to happen with these tariffs. And so, yes, it may make domestic trade of some of the primes like Boeing and Airbus easier and beneficial, but actually the aerospace sector is a global industry. And what about retaliatory tariffs as well? So that's an interesting story that's developing.
Yeah. And that was backed up by a comment by the Airbus executives who've just said, the industry is still considered to be quite fragile post-COVID. Just trying to build itself up. It's really, really fragile. So I think it's very sensitive to be shaken. And it's been shaken to the core, I think, by the tariff conversation. That said, there's always somebody or something that's going to benefit from some of this uncertainty. And so we've got the story about Honeywell. Honeywell, what's going on out there then? That has been, Honeywell reported a 14% increase in its coming out of its sales division.
That's incredible.
14% increase equates to $4.17 billion worth of sales in 2025. And you know what that's from? That is from their demand of maintenance parts and services. Why is that relevant? Of course, you've got to keep what you've got alive because there is this too much uncertainty around the provision and building of new aircraft. There's a shortage, there's a backlog. Everybody knows all about that already. So what we're going to do, we need to recycle, we need to fix, we need to repair. Whoever's in that industry, based upon the tariffs, is actually doing really, really well. And Honeywell's reported sales figures are huge, and they demonstrate that.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic because everybody probably knows the issues that Boeing has had, and their production has really slowed. So there's a real backlog, which is affecting much of the supply chain. Like Bunmi said, there's a shortage in new planes coming through. So what do you do? Refurbish old ones. So that's fantastic that Honeywell is being able to capitalize on this. And like you said, in every market, there are winners and there are losers. So, in any market, it is possible for people to companies to thrive. So that's really encouraging to see that Honeywell are capitalizing on that. And I guess it's good for the environment, recycling planes.
You know what? The whole recycling of airplanes was always a thing, right? You don't ever throw an airplane away. You just the parts, it all. But I think it's the context is like the desperation around it now. And I think that's the vibe that's out there at the moment. But you know what? It might, if it makes us quicker, smarter, cleaner. Then so be it. But I do believe somebody's got to build some new planes sometime. And do it quickly.
And they absolutely will. But yes.
Cool.
Excellent.
Did you have something else?
No.
I do. I do. Gina, do you remember when I sort of talked about my first foray really into aerospace, and it was a deal that I was on while I was at Microsoft looking at space debris and space retrieval. Well, this story explains the reason why. And it's every time I read one of these, you're just like, it really just opens your mind about what we're really talking about. So beware, everybody, get your umbrellas out or something in the UK, because the Soviet spacecraft Cosmos 482, which was launched, wait for it, in 1972.
Wow.
It was launched in 1972, and it was originally intended for not Mars, Venus. So that's 53 years ago.
That's crazy.
What happened was it malfunctioned. Of course it did. Anyway, we have malfunction stories here quite a bit, don't we? It malfunctioned.
Yeah.
And it's literally been orbiting the Earth, broken
for 50 odd years.
For 50 odd years.
Oh, wow.
For 50 odd years. Now, so what goes up must eventually come down.
Yeah.
And that's this whole point, right? There is a prediction to say that it's likely to enter the Earth's atmosphere May the 10th.
Wow,
put it in your
after
diary.
50 odd years.
After 53 years.
Crazy.
And there's a kind of longitude and latitude sort of mapping given it in, but I'm just saying UK is under the longitude and latitude mapping. I was like, do we look up now? Apparently it's not going to hit land. It's probably going to end up in the ocean.
Okay.
But please, people, point made. This piece of junk metal that was supposed to be in Venus, by the way, nowhere near Venus, has been for 53 years. Now, that is nothing compared to what is really up there at the moment.
And that's the worrying part.
That is the worrying part. We've got debris up there. I think we do need to keep thinking about how we're going to get some down. How are we going to clear it out? I know we're talking about taking some of the debris and throwing it out further into, sort of orbital routes. I'm not sure if that's the right way forward. We're talking about going up there and actually repairing some of these satellites and rockets and things, and actually bringing them back into use. That's a possibility as well. But this story that is coming out now for something that was thought about 53 years ago, I think nails the point.
Absolutely. And there's whole companies, aren't there, in the space sector that literally their job is about getting these debris down because it's a big deal.
But I think I think our timing is off. I think way more is going up.
Then it's coming down.
That we're bringing down way more is going up, and it's bringing
Absolutely.
down. And then you've got this moment in time where it's just going to come down of its own accord. Which is not an ideal way.
Definitely not.
So in the time of prediction and being able to get data and work things out to the point. Another story, the AI market in aerospace is projected to grow from $1.95 billion in 2025 to over $34 billion by 2033. I bring that up in the context of this story because there we're talking about predictive maintenance, we're talking about different flight systems and such like. We're going to have to start thinking about how this technology is going to be able to help this debris situation if we can have this kind of growth.
Absolutely. So we're going to land with a final story from aviation.
Was that it was deliberate, wasn't it?
No, it actually wasn't. It actually wasn't deliberate. It just happened.
Look at you.
So the final kind of story or bit of inspiration that I want to share with you is from Richard Branson. And yesterday he shared a really inspiring post. We're always banging on about, yes, aerospace is wonderful, but bringing innovation into an industry, thinking differently is important in any industry. It doesn't matter how successful it is. It doesn't matter what the history is. It doesn't matter what history it has. It doesn't matter how long you've done things like this, that there's always a place for innovation. There's always a place for thinking different and thinking for the future. And Richard Branson's Virgin was and is a prime example of that. And he says, in 1984, people thought they were crazy for launching an airline. He had literally no idea how the aviation world worked. But he wanted to change something. He wanted to improve the passenger experience. And so he created Virgin. And I think so often we really have to be looking at the landscape and not just focusing on what we're doing well, but what can we do better? Where is there room for improvement? Because that's what fuels innovation, and that's what fueled Virgin's innovation. And so they started in 1984, and here in 2025, he has a list of all the firsts. And many of these we didn't even realize Virgin was the first four. And it just goes to show it doesn't matter where you start, it's how you finish, as they say. And Virgin is far from finished. They're now going into space as well with Virgin Galactic. But let's just read some of their first, because I think it's so inspirational. They were the first airline to introduce seat-back entertainment. They were the first airline to launch premium economy. They built the first ever in-flight bar. They designed the first ever double beds in the air. They developed a feature called Earth Calling, and in-seat call service for passenger mobile phones. They launched charity donations for loose change from foreign currencies. I couldn't believe that. In fact, it was Richard Branson's wife that came up with that idea, and now that's on all flights. They were the first airline to fly the Airbus A340 to 600. They were the first commercial airline to fly across the Atlantic using 100% sustainable aviation fuel. I think that flight happened last year, in fact. They were the first airline to introduce a gender identity policy, which removed the requirement to our people, for people to wear for Virgin Atlantic staff to wear gendered uniform options. They were the first airline to allow crew to display tattoos, and one of the first to remove compulsory makeup requirements for cabin crew. And just such an inspiration, because, and it's a point you made, Bunmi, about the fact that these seemingly things look small in their own right, but over time you see how impactful and far-reaching they are. And so just an encouragement to, whether you've been in the industry a long time, whether you're just coming into the industry, the future is very, very bright and needs trailblazers. Because had it not been for a young man in 1984 who said, actually, we need to do things better and we can do things differently. And I'm not going to be led by how things have been done. I'm going to add value to an industry that has been around for decades, probably thinks I shouldn't be here. Probably thinks I'm going to fail. In fact, they did. Most people said he would fail. And so I want that to be an encouragement to us all, that there is much benefit to innovating and building towards the future.
I love that. I've been scribbling and writing all sorts down, but I mean, we know our audience are people who are either in the aerospace industry or thinking to pivot into it. And I think that story is, like you said, an absolute fuel and motivation. Richard Branson started by selling records, for goodness sake.
Literally.
Out of his boots? And now to have that list that you said there, that is the ultimate demonstration of I'll pivot. It's not what I do. It's never been what I do, but I'm going to make it what I do. It's okay to be the first.
Exactly.
It's okay not to know.
It's
okay not to know. We've got enough to be able out there now to be able to build your capacity and your knowledge. I think we've talked about, by virtue of our stories today, how the entry into the industry can come from so many different areas. Yes, I know we talk about STEM. Yes, I know we talk about engineering. But if you're a conservationist, if you care about food safety, if food and the environment and that type of thing, if you, I don't know, if you used to sell records,
yeah.
this is something that you want to get into. I just think that this is a really, really great way of messaging all of that. So
100%.
Yes.
100%. Well, that is it for this week. And we'll be doing this quite often because, you know, we were looking at stories today and it was like, you know what, let's bring everyone in to a fly on the wall because this helps our knowledge development. And I think it's important to keep your finger on the pulse.
Yes.
There's always more to learn. There's always more to know, especially in an industry like aerospace that is constantly evolving. And some of you that, you know, are in the industry day to day, perhaps you don't have time to be sometimes you're so in the trenches doing the work. That this is kind of just like a coffee break to kind of share what's new and what our thoughts are on it. So we'll be back with you next month. Before then, we're going to do a live with a guest in a couple of weeks. So stay tuned for that. If you watch this live, great to have you here. If you're catching the replay, thanks for joining. Thanks for watching. If you have any thoughts, comments, any stories you want to talk about moving forward, drop them in the comments below and we'll see you soon. Thank you for watching Aerospace Chronicles.
Yes. Take care. Thank you.
See you soon.